Hi there. This is my commentary on Chapter 2 of Lila, An Inquiry into Morals by Robert M. Pirsig. When Pheadrus awoke, he saw through the hatch that the sky had become less black. Dawn was coming. Then he realized he wasn't alone. In fact, he was blocked physically from getting out of the bunk by a body between him and the boat's passageway. This was Lila, he remembered. So Pheadrus's task is not to wake her up, and what is described here is how you have to maneuver your body in a boat. And there are all sorts of limitations to maneuvering your body in a boat, such as the fact that the boat is always moving if it's on water, and that it's very cramped. It's a small space, so it requires real finesse to maneuver. It was a grace he'd acquired the hard way. When he first got the boat, he walked around like it was a house, slipped on some diesel oil, plunged headfirst down the companionway ladder, and broke a collarbone. Now he'd learned to move like a spider monkey, particularly in storms when the whole boat rose and pitched and rolled like a flying trapeze. So think about that grace and how it works with the real actual experience of being on the boat and learning how to maneuver. And it's interesting to think that his body becomes kind of like a previous iteration of the human body, his simian ancestor who was really so much part of nature. So the boat, while being a technological apparatus, is subject to a natural force. You know, it's made exactly to interact with the force of water, and it flows through the water, and the force of the water flows through it. So it's a lot like a motorcycle and the road, the same relationship. But the boat is in relationship with the water, the same way the motorcycle is in relationship with the road. So you can't just walk around on it like it's, like it's on a flat surface, like it's a road. You have to move in harmony with the water, with nature, just like a monkey would. And Pheadrus had to come in contact with that force. He had to learn how to align with that force. And the result of that alignment is a quality relationship between him and the water, coming out in the form of an animal precursor, let's say. It felt good not to be related to this harbor in any way. He didn't know what was above the banks of the river or behind the harbor buildings, or where the roads led to, or who the houses belonged to, or what people would appear here today, or what people they would meet. It was like a picture book, and he was a child watching it, waiting for a page to be turned. So remember, he was in the locks, and he was stuck there going down until he was at the mouth of the river, and he was free. And now he's away from the harbor and out into the open. And from this vantage point, he can disengage from the harbor and is able to observe the buildings over there and the world go by without being attached to anything. So is that metaphorical? It probably is. So he needs to heat the place up. Remember, this is November and he's outside and on the boat and in New York. And on the boat, this is a bit of a procedure involving alcohol and charcoal briquettes and a little stove. So meanwhile, while the rest of us sit in perfect comfort on the shore, barely realized how manufactured that comfort it is and how much work it is to sustain that comfort. We forget it. It just becomes part of our environment, like it's natural. And it takes something like this to actually pull us out of that and to remember what we really are. We're in nature, and this is all very artificial, keeping us so comfortable. So something like going camping reminds you of that. On the picture book shore out there, everything was done by magic. They got their heat and electricity without even thinking about it. But in this little floating world, whatever you needed, you had to get for yourself. Another way that this boat is sort of metaphorically tied to nature, it's a world that really is embedded in nature in the way that our shore world, that our harbor world is not. And so being disengaged from that harbor, you see it as a totality, the harbor world with its automatic comforts, and he's viewing it like a picture book where you can see at that distance in a different way. Like, you know where the old buildings are and where the gentrification is. And Pheadrus notes a pseudo-Victorian flavor to the gentrification. And certainly this phenomenon did end up hitting most waterfronts along the East Coast really hard in the past couple of decades. Could you imagine, like someone growing up in Baltimore, I'd say the 60s or 70s, could they ever imagine what would end up happening to the Baltimore harbor? And you could say that about harbors all along the East Coast. So as the alcohol fog lifts, and not the alcohol from the little stove, but the alcohol from the cans of beer the night before, not very expensive beer, I imagine, and the cold orients him back into the reality of this morning, he finds a large suitcase on his deck. And that, of course, belongs to Lila. And somehow she's managed to convince him to take her on his boat. But as it turns out, she's only asking him to take her to Manhattan, which is only a couple of days away. You know, she's had to get off the boat of that guy, you know, that dirty double-crosser George and his whore, Debbie, if you remember from the reading. So now she's on Pheadrus's boat, and where that biological quality kind of took a hold of him the night before, she was able to convince him to take her on. He saw that her suitcase had shoved all the trays of slips over to one side of the pilot berth. They were for a book he was working on, and one of the 4 long card catalog type trays was by an edge where it could fall off. That's all he needed, he thought, about 3,000 4x6 slips of notepad paper all over the floor. So here's where we're going to get some fascinating insight into Pheadrus's and actually Pirsig's actual writing organizational method. Like I said, this novel is more of a novel than Zam, but there is so much autobiographical stuff in it. There's so much stuff that actually happened. This, of course, is his actual writing program. So he writes on these 4x6 pieces of notepaper rather than on pads or in a book. And now as the scene unfolds, he's been working on these notes that he files in the card catalog trays for 4 years, and now there are 11,000 of them. So what is the book he's working on? Their overall subject he called a metaphysics of quality, or sometimes a metaphysics of value, or sometimes just MOQ to save time. The buildings out there on the shore were in one world, and these slips were in another. This slip world was quite a world, and he'd almost lost it once because he hadn't written any of it down, and incidents came along that it destroyed his memory of it. All right, if you haven't read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is unlikely if you're, following this and reading Lila, but if you haven't, we know what those incidents were that had destroyed his memory. It was like 30 sessions of electroshock therapy for his delusions, for his nervous breakdown from discovering that for 2,500 years we've been following the wrong metaphysics. We've been living within the wrong mythos, the wrong metaphysics. And this is how a lot of severe mental illness was handled at the time. This was like 1960, 1961. They would handle it with electroshock therapy or even lobotomy. And in fact, there was threat of lobotomy for Pirsig. So he was very fortunate to have escaped that, and I think it was from behaving as if he was not Pheadrus, becoming Robert. That's how he avoided lobotomy and how he got out of mental institution. But now that he's Pheadrus again, and remember he becomes Pheadrus again at the end of the book, he's back on track with his quality project. And the ideas, as they did for Pheadrus, just keep coming and coming and coming to the point that they are unmanageable unless they can be offloaded. The main purpose of the slips was not to help him remember anything, it was to help him forget. So you probably noticed in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and as you will see here in Lila, that many of the statements Pirsig makes are analogies to describe the underlying principles of his philosophy. So this next statement or anecdote or whatever you want to call it is, and it's an analogy actually is what he calls it, is one of those. There's an old analogy to a cup of tea. If you want to drink new tea, you have to get rid of the old tea that's in your cup. Otherwise, your cup just overflows and you get a wet mess. Your head is like that cup. It has a limited capacity, and if you want to learn something about the world, you should keep your head empty in order to learn it. It's very easy to spend your whole life swishing old tea around in your cup and thinking it's great stuff because you never really tried anything new, because you could never get it in because the old stuff prevented its entry, because you were so sure the old stuff was so good because you never really tried anything new, and on in an endless circular pattern. So the concept of offloading becomes really important here because you need to let things go in order to grow. Now he's offloading into writing, into these cards, but offloading is a concept anyway because sometimes you just have to let something old go in order to restructure and to advance and to evolve. And if you remember, Jordan Peterson had an analogy about burning off the outer layer so something from the core could rise and grow. I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but it was like you have to burn off the detritus. But for our purposes, remember some of the gumption traps in chapter 26 of Zen, the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So being stuck in an old value system that you were reluctant to discard is rather described by this teacup analogy. So this would be in the gumption trap lingo, it would be a value trap, holding on to old values and just not being able to get rid of them and thinking the world is structured around these values when really you need to restructure your value system. And remember that this is the most problematic trap in the gumption trap Chautauqua. It's the most problematic barrier to quality. So now I'm going to read a whole paragraph describing his note cards system. The reason Pheadrus used slips rather than full-size sheets of paper is that a card catalog tray full of slips provides a more random access. When information is organized in small chunks that can be accessed and sequenced at random, it becomes more valuable than when you have to take it in serial form. It's better, for example, to run a post office where the patrons have numbered boxes and can come in and to access these boxes at any time they please. It's worse to have them all come in at a certain time, stand in a queue, and get their mail from Joe, who has to sort through everything alphabetically each time, and who has rheumatism, is going to retire in a few years, and who doesn't care whether they like waiting or not. When any distribution is locked into a rigid sequential format, it develops Joes that dictate what new changes will be allowed and what will not, and that rigidity is deadly. This is going to be an ongoing theme in this book. And of course, Joe is a symbol for that rigid way of thinking that prevents any kind of update to the system, the teacup analogy. Remember all those rhetoric teachers in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance who were stuck in this Aristotelian mode of enforcing so-called quality from the top down in the form of the rules for a good essay, the rules and regulations concerning writing, rather than the bottom-up method that Pheadrus discovered, where quality guides the writing. So in this situation, Joe rules. And random access is likely to be the first actual term that we're going to be able to identify as maybe some of the language that will help us understand this philosophy, which has been named as the metaphysics of quality. Some of the slips were actually about this topic, random access and quality. The two are closely related. Random access is at the essence of organic growth, in which cells, like post office boxes, are relatively independent. Cities are based on random access. Democracies are founded on it. The free market system, free speech, and the growth of science are all based on it. A library is one of civilization's most powerful tools precisely because of its card catalog trays. Without the Dewey Decimal System allowing the number of cards in the main catalog to grow or shrink at any point, the whole library would soon grow stale and useless and die. All right, so we've got another concept that's going to be very important in the metaphysics of quality, and that is freedom. So free market, free speech. There's a freedom to random access that this rigid sequential access does not allow. And his system allows for any idea to be considered. As we'll soon see, there's a place for all ideas. This is an important aspect of the system because it dispenses with any preconceived notions of what idea is good. And in this case, what constitutes the metaphysics of quality, or what is a way of describing it, because this is what he's working on. So just like the Dewey Decimal System, this system accommodates ideas that come in. The Dewey Decimal System accommodates any books that come in rather than only allowing certain books to be placed in a library based on categories that are already in place. There was no ideological Joes to kill an idea because it didn't fit into what he was already thinking, because he didn't prejudge the fittingness of new ideas or try to put them in order, but just let them flow in. These ideas sometimes came in so fast you couldn't write them down quickly enough. All right, if you are trying to apply Pirsig's philosophy to your life, this is an unbelievably important passage. You need to be open to what's coming in you kind of have to be really aware when, and this is very difficult, and this is why that whole Chautauqua, and this is why a lot of this book has been written, is to a value of the notion that there are preconceived values that are, let's just say, axiomatic, that have existed in time from the beginning of time. Now, there's going to be some argument about this. There certainly would be religious argument about this, and this is a really interesting and useful debate pertaining to the metaphysics of quality. And this debate about are there fixed values or are there not fixed values? Well, in a way, in the metaphysics of quality will show you that in a way there are, but there also aren't. But right now we're talking about being open-minded, being open to what is presenting itself to you in the present. So here Pheadrus is with all the ideas flowing in. Now there's also a downside to this. There had been times when an urge surfaced to take the slips, pile by pile, and file them into the door of the coal stove on top of the glowing charcoal briquettes, and then close the door and listen to the cricking of the metal as they turned into smoke. Then it would all be gone, and he would be really free again, except that he wouldn't be free. It would still be there in his mind to do. So remember in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance that what he said about the church or the university is a pattern, that even when the building that housed the church or the university is gone, the spirit of the institution still stands. When a revolution tears down an established government, the paradigm of the hierarchy doesn't get torn down, it just gets repopulated with these new revolutionaries. Russia, perfect example. The Tsar, a rigid, repressive regime, is replaced with Stalin, a rigid, repressive regime, and the people at the bottom still suffer. Or in both cases, most of the people suffer. It's just that the people suffering are replaced by other people, and the top is replaced, but the hierarchy remains the same. And that pattern, that ghost, is what he's talking about. In his mind, he's got this drive towards this quality project, and it's not going to go away even if he destroys all the material. Remember, it happened once before. So much of this section deals with the specifics of working with the system and some of the challenges anyone who has any kind of system is going to recognize. So any kind of system is going to have some benefits and some things that are challenging. And this section mirrors a little the frustrations and the gumption Chautauqua again, things that flatten you mostly because you can't let the idea go that this isn't working and you have to start all over again. And that is really, really frustrating. And in the gumption Chautauqua, it can hold you up, like when you fix the motorcycle wrong and there's one little part that you should have done at the beginning, and now you have to take the whole thing apart. That can flatten you for a month before you want to go back to it. So a lot of this section is talking about that kind of frustration. One interesting aspect of this is how being able to articulate and write about this new metaphysics, which is of course a very, very difficult topic, emerges from this dynamic system of organization. For example, when he's organizing these cards, and this illustrates the brilliance of the system, he'll have to look at cards and say, okay, so I wish I had some with me. I'm trying to use the system myself. He'll look at the index cards and he'll say, so I have some right here. So he'll have the cards and he'll say, all right, which one comes first? This one or this one? Okay, so it's this one. And so which one comes after that? And he picks up another card and he goes, okay, so this comes after that. And you do this until you have all your cards organized in sequence. See how that's another reason why this note card situation is a much better system. Imagine trying to do that with a whole bunch of pages that you have in a notebook, that you're going to have to cross out and rewrite, and maybe you'll end up cutting them into cards because it's going to drive you crazy. And it's even better, this is like this. I'm going to say that this system is better than anything you can do on the computer, because on the computer you're cutting and pasting, or maybe you have a bunch of little, really, I can't imagine a better system for writing. Maybe that's a value to have. So then what he notices with the system is the topics themselves start emerging on their own, and then he can section off the cards with little tabs for each topic. So instead of making the topics ahead of time, like saying, okay, these are the topics that should be in the metaphysics of quality, and then filling them in. The topics themselves, the categorization, emerge naturally. And this alone, I think, illustrates the benefit of the system. Because his topic is so vast in new metaphysics, it's nearly impossible to organize from the top down. It was fascinating to watch this thing grow. No one that he knew had ever written a whole metaphysics before, and there were no rules for doing it, no way of predicting how it would progress. So yes, it's an entirely new thing, so the fact of the matter is, even by default, a whole new method of doing it is necessary. But he didn't have to do it this way. He could have said, okay, I'm writing a metaphysics, so let's make a bunch of categories of what metaphysics is and fill those in with the metaphysics of quality. He could have done that, but he doesn't. He chooses this dynamic card or note paper system. So besides the categories that naturally emerge, there are 5 other categories, and we will talk about them because this is what allows the system to take in any and all ideas. You've got some of these areas for, let's just say, ideas that aren't really fitting into these categories just yet. So the first category is unassimilated, and these are ideas that come in at the wrong time, when you're not working or when you're busy doing something else. Normally your mind says to these ideas, go away, I'm busy, but that attitude is deadly to quality. Remember in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the truth knocks at the door, and you tell it to go away, and so it goes away. So I think there's something of that in there. Now this really hits hard, though, because just think of all those great ideas you've lost because you were either too lazy or too busy to record them. So already, aren't you beginning to get sold on the system, because you can carry one of these around any time. Program slips were instructions for what to do with the rest of the slips. What made them so powerful was that they too were slips, one slip for each instruction. This meant that program slips were random access too, and could be changed and resequenced as the need arose without any difficulty. He remembered reading that John von Neumann, the inventor of the computer, had said the single thing that makes a computer so powerful is that the program is data and can be treated like any other data. That seemed a little obscure when Pheadrus had read it, but now it was making sense. I'm not sure I'm going to get this interpretation 100% right, but I think I at least have a little part of it. So you can actually, what I think the benefit of this is that you can actually restructure your entire system as you're working on it. You can let the way the data is emerging inform you as to how the whole system itself needs to be restructured. And the fact that you can do this keeps your system open to change, and it's not going to negate anything you've already done because the categories themselves have already emerged independently of the program. So if you make the program rigid, you're committing the same mistake. You have a bunch of mailboxes you can access anytime. Okay, we've established that. But just say the ones that are being used most end up being in the back of the room. And so sometimes you need to get the contractors in and move the mailboxes being used the most back to the front of the post office and put the ones that no one ever accesses to the back. So the next slips are the crit slips, meaning criticism. And this is the Festivus pole of the system. These are for airing grievances when the author is in a bad mood, and it's substitute for throwing things away. It's a good substitute because say you're pissed off at all your work, and you're really likely then to throw away stuff in an impulsive way to give yourself some relief from this painful feeling of just hating everything you're doing. So say you throw away all your ex's clothing, and you realize later that you really liked wearing one of those shirts that he had to bed, and it was really comfortable, and now you've put it in the bin, and the trash man has come and picked up the trash. And another thing you threw away is a brand new pair of designer jeans that he never wore and that you now see that you can get $120 for on eBay. So crit is very good. You air the grievances in this system and you hold on to everything. And by doing that, you have a place to, dislodge this negativity, and you don't do it by throwing things away in an impulsive way. The next to last group was the tough category. This contains slips that seemed to say something of importance, but didn't fit into any topic you could think of. It prevented getting stuck on some slip whose place might become obvious later on. The final category was junk. These were slips that seemed of high value when you wrote them down, but which now seemed awful. The junk and tough end up being the ones that bother him for obvious reasons. And of course, his impulse is to, in fact, shove them under the rug. These were the underdogs, the outsiders, the pariahs, the sinners of the system. But the reason he was so concerned about them was that he felt the quality and strength of his entire system of organization depended on how he treated them. If he treated the pariahs well, he would have a good system. If he treated them badly, he would have a weak one. That's because that if you treat them badly, they can drag you down. This is an example of the shadow. So let's just say these two categories are the shadow of the system, and we already know that if you don't address the entirety of the system, the parts that you're ignoring will come bite you in the ass. You also will lose anything important that you're not seeing that is in those, let's just say, those two categories. You'll lose what is an important root to the thing that you need. So even if things look on the surface rationally to be the things you want to throw away, you may need them later. So we're going to see this as we open chapter 3, and we're going to allude to this a little bit at the end of this chapter. The hundreds of topics had organized themselves into larger sections, the sections into chapters, and the chapters into parts, so that what the slips had organized themselves into was finally the contents of the book. Very interesting. Doesn't it make you want to use the system if you are confused as to how to write a book? But it was a book whose organization was from the bottom up rather than the top down. He hadn't started with a master idea and then selected in Joe fashion only those slips that would fit. In this case, Joe, the organizing principle, had been democratically elected by the slips themselves. And as we saw, Joe can be voted out if need be, or he can be pressured by his constituents to modify his behavior. The junk and tough slips didn't participate in this election, and that created an underlying dissatisfaction. But he felt you can't expect a perfect system of organization of anything. He kept the junk pile as small as possible without deliberately suppressing it, and that was the most anyone could ask. Yes, you always have to deal with your shadow, and you can't suppress it. And I think this concept drives people crazy who are trying to find spiritual peace. You will always, no matter where you are in your spiritual journey, you will always have to deal with a little bit of the devil. As Alan Watts said, there's always an element of irreducible rascality. So as simple as the system sounds, it often caused him a lot of problems, like a slip fitting into a lot of categories, or slips so strange they fit nowhere that he couldn't get rid of. And sometimes the negative piles, the junk and the tough piles and the crit piles get too large. And when those piles get too large, that means that Joe needs to be pressured to change, or Joe needs to be reelected, etc. And then you get back to that whole problem in the Gumption Chautauqua where you get flattened by something that really isn't working. You need to change the whole system. So nothing worth doing is easy. And this book took 19 years to write. But one thing about Pirsig's writing is that everything ties together. There isn't a wasted line. I've said this before about about Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and I will absolutely say the same thing about Lila. There is no line that's wasted. Everything means something. I think it's because this system, you've got all these ideas and you're tying them together with this system, like the Poincaré, the things rise to the surface and tie everything together. And I think that this system is partially responsible, in fact, very responsible, for why Pirsig's writing is so coherent. So during this review of the system, Pheadrus picks up a tray. The tray was the oldest one. It had slips he hadn't looked at for more than a year now. He brought it over to the table with him. The first topic at the very front of the tray was Dusenberry. He looked at it nostalgically. At one time he thought Dusenberry was going to be at the center of the whole book. We're going to read about Dusenberry coming up shortly. This is one of the real elements, again, one of the autobiographical elements of this novel. Dusenberry was real, and you can look up Vern Dusenberry right now on Google. After a while, he took a blank pad from the back of the tray and wrote on the top slip, "Program," and then under it, "Hang up everything until Lila gone." Probably a good idea. Lila has already demonstrated that she's a big presence on a small boat. So I hope this makes sense, and I will see you next time for Chapter 3 of Lila.